All right, hey guys, and welcome back to the lecture series. I'm Ted, your host, and for this lecture, we're going to conduct an analysis of the New Deal to see what it really did and what it didn't do. So, to begin with, let me just start by saying that during the 1930s, Franklin Roosevelt was simultaneously beloved and reviled by the American population. During the 1936 election, Roosevelt received the largest electoral vote margin in the history of the United States, and Roosevelt is often regarded as one of the greatest presidents in the history of the United States for his leadership during World War II and for his New Deal program. And the New Deal program that he crafted aimed to combat the Great Depression, currently the worst economic crisis to ever happen in the United States. Now, to his detractors, Roosevelt was a dangerous hypocrite with dictatorial ambitions whose New Deal programs threatened the economic and political liberty of the Republic. Now, while the New Deal did fail to end the Depression, Roosevelt and his policies also did not destroy the American system, although one can argue that many of the New Deal's New Deal's aims created the social and the economic dilemmas of our time. They can all be traced back to Roosevelt's New Deal and his administration in general. Now, to get the complete view of Roosevelt and the New Deal, we have to look further. We have to really analyze what the aims of the New Deal were and what was really accomplished by the New Deal. We also have to observe how the intended and the unintended consequences influences the then and the current situation and continue to influence the contemporary United States. And to do so, let's go back to the United States in 1932. Now, as we have already noted, when Roosevelt was inaugurated, he was inaugurated in the midst of one of the greatest economic crises in United States history. By the date of his inauguration, the Great Depression had brought the economic life of the Republic to a standstill. 25% of the labor force was unemployed, and the U.S. Steel, which had been the titan of American industries and boasted of over 250,000 employees, had less than 20,000 employees, none of whom were full-time. To complicate things even further, the national GDP was half of what it had been in 1929, and a third of the Republic banks had already failed. And early in 1933, 38 state governors closed the banks in their states to prevent a total financial collapse. The first task that confronted Roosevelt was the runs on the bank. He sought to immediately restore people's trust in banks. Roosevelt addressed the issue very quickly with his inaugural address, telling the nation that the only thing they had to fear was fear itself. And now, as we have seen, there was plenty to fear, but Roosevelt did hit a public nerve. Nearly half of 1 million letters arrived to the White House in the first week of Roosevelt's administration alone. Throughout his presidency, the numbers of those letters would average around 5,000 a week. And this necessitated an expansion of the White House mail staff room. It went from about 1 to 3. I want to say there was one full-time mail person in the White House before Roosevelt's administration. In the first week of Roosevelt's administration, he shut down all the banks in the nation to prevent a collapse during during this period. He called it a banking holiday. Roosevelt called on Congress to come into a special session, and there Roosevelt and his cabinet drafted legislation that will be presented to Congress. The first bill presented to Congress was an emergency banking bill that was largely written by and really written for bankers. It provided the government it provided for the government to inspect and assist bankers and to really reopen sound banks. The new bill passed the House of Representatives unread in 38 minutes. It received presidential approval and was signed into law within 8 hours of being introduced. A revolutionary feat. Legislation really doesn't work that way. It's a very drawn-out process. with a lot of readings and rewritings and readings and rewriting before it's even really voted on. Now, Roosevelt then introduced a bill to Congress to cut federal spending and balance the budget by cutting veterans' benefits and federal salaries. There was also a bill to allow for the sale and taxing of beer and wine following the repeal of Prohibition. On March 12th, 1933, Roosevelt gave the first of his famous fireside chats to 60 million Americans over the radio. In the broadcast, Roosevelt stated that the banking system was sound and that the banks would reopen the following day. When the banks reopened, there was the tellers were greeted by throngs of account holders of bank customers who were there to deposit funds. The immediate crisis was really over at that point. Roosevelt had hit a nerve. He and his advisors now sought to use legislation to attain the three fundamental R's. And the three fundamental R's of the New Deal are relief, reform, and recovery. The three R's. Temporary relief for those who are suffering the worst currently. Reform so that a collapse like the Depression could never occur again. And economic recovery for the industrial and agrarian sectors of the national economy. Now, to accomplish this task, Roosevelt will present 15 major bills to Congress. All of these bills were passed in the next 6 weeks and comprised the core feature of the famous 100 days, of the famous first 100 days. To name a few, we had the Agricultural Adjustment Act, the Homeowners Loan Act, the National Recovery Act, the establishment of the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Tennessee Valley Authority. All of these came about from the first 100 days, from those 15 bills that came about from the first 100 days. In 1935 and 1936, Roosevelt and Congress went much further and embarked upon the Second New Deal, which included a massive public works program that put millions of Americans to work on steady jobs. The Public Works Administration under Harry Hopkins would end up employing over 8 million workers, and the Social Security Act was passed, and it provided for national old age insurance, national old age pensions, along with care for destitute and dependents via workers' employment insurance. Now, the Wagner Labor Relations Act established the National Labor Relations Board, which for the first time threw the weight of the government behind the labor to collectively bargain. Higher taxes on the wealthy, electricity in rural areas, and an expanded role for the federal government and banking system were real hallmarks of this. The bills associated with the New Deals were only partially successful at relief, recovery, and reform. With the first New Deal, the spiral downward was halted and economic recovery began. Confidence was restored. Hope was sustained and starvation avoided. By 1934, a modest recovery was in effect. Within the next year, there was some recovery. Then the recovery stalled far short of the figures of Hoover's recovery in 1929. The Second New Deal. The Second New Deal saw major and sustained recovery that saw the Republic economic levels return to their 1929 levels before a major recession that lasted from 1937 to 38 wiped it all out. The New Deal's relief bills did not help those who were suffering, but far. It did help those that were suffering, but it was far too conservative to help them all. The recovery policies made the economic realities worse for many of these people, and the efforts made to reform the economic system did not prevent further economic collapse. They were partially repealed decades later when they were not able to prevent the recession of of 1937, 1938, and really to understand why. To understand why the New Deal was only partially successful, we must look at Roosevelt and his own advisors to observe how they operated and ascertain their beliefs. Roosevelt was perhaps the best politician the Republic ever produced. And that's including that's including the Revolutionary period, all the way to the current president, the 21st century. Roosevelt was perhaps the best politician ever created by the Republic. And really, that makes him very, very, very difficult to analyze or to understand, as one cannot take his public or private comments at face value. Roosevelt was an evasive charmer. He was a master manipulator of public opinion, and he used a mask of jovial simple-mindedness to conceal an interior that was far more complex and secretive. In short, he reserved his innermost thoughts to himself, along with ideas that really do not shine through that veneer. And to be certain, political ideologies and political consistencies were not very high to him. They were not very high on the list of things important to him. It is said that Roosevelt had a short attention span, but a mind like a fly paper, like a steel trap. What set Roosevelt apart from his presidential predecessors and political contemporaries was really his willingness to experiment. And really, he did not hesitate to experiment. He did not really exist in an intellectual vacuum. He was a member of his era, and more importantly, he was a member of his class. He had no socialist or Marxist ideas. Nationalization of major industries in 1933 was never an option for him. Roosevelt personally was a very reserved man, a very conservative man who sought to preserve what he deemed to be the essentials of the American political system. And he did so by changing it. His area of expertise, he was most formidable, not at formulating ideas, but in gaining acceptance of those ideas. He emerged as a political and a media genius due to his great success in getting other people to support ideas and causes that he championed. Many aspects of the New Deal made more political sense than they actually made economic sense. His principal advisors, a group known as the Brain Trust, they were comprised of individuals who sharply disagreed with each other over what they wanted to present to Roosevelt. And all of his advisors had progressive roots and believed that government had a responsibility to provide some sort of protection for all. And behind that, there was really no unity or coherence in formulating what type of policy ought to be pursued. The old Theodore Roosevelt nationalists accepted corporations, and they wanted to create some form of business-government cooperation. They wanted to curb. They didn't really want to curb big business and restore agriculture. There was also the Woodrow Wilson New Freedomites. And they wanted to discipline the financiers. They wanted to break up the big business. They wanted to restore competition. There were old populists out there. And the populists floated around ideas in the Brain Trust, such as helping to regulate and to help agriculture. And there was also a deep fear of Wall Street by those populists who were still around, who were still circulating their ideas. The ideas of the social gospel reformers surfaced as well. And many plans were made for aiding the aged as well. Now, most of these reformers wanted the budget balance and did not believe in massive deficit spending. Roosevelt didn't really believe in that either, but he embarked on it because he thought that it would help the New Deal. It would help the nation. Many of them did not believe that massive deficit spending was necessary to generate government purchasing power. And really, that just helped to further complicate and frustrate affairs, because they did not really have any sort of cohesion in that matter. And Roosevelt's personal style of management, a little thing, a management style that we call competitive administration, really just added to the chaos and the confusion. Roosevelt took to staffing offices with people who had opposing ideas inside the same department. Now this style of management can lead to great creativity when there is agreement on fundamentals, but because there was no unity, there was no cohesion on how to approach relief, recovery, and reform within Roosevelt's advisory corps. This resulted in chaos, and inability to mobilize thinkers to support a unifying idea. The result was that the New Deal was being composed in a hodgepodge manner with influences from many groups represented by Roosevelt's advisors. You had the Theodore Roosevelt progressives. You had old, tried and true progressives. You had the Woodrow Wilson New Freedomites, and of course the remnants of the progressives and social gospel movements, all throwing together ideas, all trying to bridge this divide, and really crafting legislation and programs that, for the most part, were not very unified, were not very coherent, were not very strongly supported. Not the best of the best shining forth there. And with that being said, we'll break here. We'll come back with part 2 of our lecture on the New Deal analysis. And as always, I'm Ted. Hit like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know what you thought about this lecture.